This is the Bible Book Club.
The Book of Job.
Welcome to the club. Last episode in chapter 1, we glimpsed a small snapshot of the life of Job. He is devout. In fact, God said he was blameless. He has a loving family and all the wealth that the world could offer. He's a leader in his house and his community and has wide-reaching status. Then the story dramatically shifts in a totally different way. God was holding court and Satan, the accuser, presented a case. Satan insists that he can prove that God's followers are only faithful for what they get from God. Well, God gives Satan permission to test this theory out on Job, and off he went.
And we ended our last episode in chapter 1, verse 12, which said this.
The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord.
So in this next scene, Satan will take full advantage of God's permission and strip Job down to nothing without hurting him physically. God allows Satan's attacks to silence Satan's accusation and prove that a man could be faithful even if he lost everything. Scene 1, the devastation of Job.
Job chapter 1, continuing in verse 13. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sebans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who's escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I'm the only one who escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who's escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, "Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house. Suddenly, a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they're dead, and I am the only one who's escaped to tell you."
The scene opens when the children are conveniently together, presumably at one of the birthday parties the author informed us about in verses 1 through 5. Now, everything Job had was wiped out in a single day in rapid fire succession. The text says the messengers came so fast that each one arrived while the previous one was still speaking. First, the Sabeans, a people from southeast Arabia, raided the livestock and killed servants. Second, fire, most likely lightning, ignited a fire and killed the sheep and more servants. Third, the Chaldeans, a people from the Mesopotamian valley, took the camels and killed those servants. And then, the most devastating, a wind, possibly a tornado, collapsed the house and killed all 10 of Job's children. Now, Satan used human, natural, and supernatural means to bring about the total destruction of everything Job owned or held dear, with the exception of his wife. But he has a plan to use her, too, in just a minute. The damage was too catastrophic to be a coincidence, and Job knows it.
Verse 20, at this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing.
Job immediately sees the hand of God in his devastation, and he worships. He mourns, but he also acknowledges God as his creator. His prose takes us from the womb to the tomb. He came to this world with nothing, and he will leave this world with nothing. Job teaches us that we can worship even when we do not understand. We must also learn to accept that we came into this world with nothing, and we will leave with nothing. So no matter how dear we hold people or possessions, they are not ours to keep. They belong to God. We belong to God. Now, Job acknowledges that the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. In all that giving and the taking, we too must praise him. And with that, I imagine the heavenly hosts leaned in, because in the heavenly realm, it was God that Satan was attempting to put on trial. He accused God of a transactional relationship with man. He said Job would curse God if he didn't prosper. Well, Job's prosperity is gone, but Job did not curse God. In fact, it says
Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing.
Round 1 in this trial goes to God. However, Satan never, I repeat, never gives up easily. Scene 2, Satan wants more.
Job chapter 2. On another day, the angels came to present themselves to the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before him. And the Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason."
This scene would be humorous if the topic weren't so tragic. God states exactly the same words as in Satan's first visit.
"Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil."
But he adds this,
"And he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason."
I can't help picturing God being just a little bit sardonic as he casually sat back on his ginormous throne, leaning on one elbow as if Satan was no more significant than a speck of lint on his robe. In other words, it might sound like this. "So, Satan, haven't seen you in a while. What happened to your Job test? Looks like you devastated the poor man, and for no reason. Because what's that?" And he probably would hold his hand up to his ear. "I don't hear anything. No cursing coming from down there. Yep, my man Job is still blameless and upright, fearing God and shunning evil. What a great guy. I love him. He loves me. It has nothing to do with how much stuff I give him." God must have had some kind of tone to his words, because what he said made Satan furious.
Verse 4. "Skin for skin," Satan replied. "A man will give all he has for his own life, but now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then. He is in your hands, but you must spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head.
Satan wants more because Satan is desperate to prove his case. In fact, he's furious, and he wants more than stuff this time. He wants to bring Job down. So what does skin for skin mean? Satan argues that Job only remained faithful because the suffering hadn't touched him physically yet. His children, his wealth, his livestock, those were all external. Skin for skin means you'll trade anything and anyone to protect your own skin. God again allows the test, and Satan attacks Job. The exact disease is unknown. The sores covered his entire body. And as we read on in other verses in Job, we're going to discover that the disease was extremely invasive. So wrap your head around how bad this was for Job. Listen to the other verses that describe it.
These are the verses from the future chapters that we have not yet read in Job. Job 7:4, "When I lie down, I think, how long before I get up? The night drags on and I toss and turn until dawn. My body is clothed in worms and scabs. My skin is broken and festering." And then in Job 19:17, "My breath is offensive to my wife. I am loathsome to my own family." And then Job 19:20, "I am nothing but skin and bones. I have escaped only by the skin of my teeth." And then in Job 30:27, the churning inside me never stops. Days of suffering confront me. I go about blackened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I have become a brother of jackals, a companion of owls. My skin grows black and peels. My body burns with fever.
Scholars and physicians over the centuries have debated what Job's disease was, considering everything from smallpox to leprosy to severe eczema to cancer. The description suggests something systematic, painful, and visibly disfiguring. Whatever it was so bad that his friends didn't recognize him when they arrived, and they sat in silence for 7 days just looking at him. That detail alone, 7 days of speechless silence, tells us everything we need to know about how devastating his appearance must have been. Now, in the first trial, God allowed Satan to take away all the good in life. In the second trial, God allowed Satan to bring all the bad in life. In Job, we will get many lessons on how suffering operates. This is just one of them. Suffering can be the absence of all that is good and or the presence of all that is bad. Scene 3, Job's wife tempts him to curse God.
Now back to our story in Job chapter 2, continuing in verse 8. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." He replied, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this, Job did not sin in what he said.
Job is still defending God. Well, what is scraping himself and sitting in ashes? Many commentators interpret the disease as indicating boils on the skin that cause intolerable itching. The scraping would relieve the itching and remove the decaying skin. Sitting in ashes was a sign of mourning. We discussed this in our last season in the book of Esther. Mordecai, you'll recall, put on ashes when he learned of the edict to annihilate the Jews. In the process of putting on ashes, a person would either take handfuls of ashes and pour them over himself, they would roll in the ashes, or they would sleep or sit in ashes. It communicated to others that their joy or life had been burned to the ground. Their identity was now covered in death and ruin, which aptly describes Job at this point. So why did Job's wife tell him to curse God and die? Until now, Job's wife has been silent. She has suffered all the emotional pain that Job has. Her grief and shock at losing 10 children had probably left her without speech, without hope, drained of strength, and therefore words. Now it seems she can endure no more. To see her husband so afflicted is more than she can bear. Her emotions are understandably unhinged, and the accuser uses that to his advantage. She urges her husband to do exactly what Satan had suggested that he would do in Job 1:11 and Job 2:5.
1:11, but now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. And then in 2:5, but now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face.
Job's wife implies that death is preferable to the torture he's experiencing, which is a note to us. When suffering occurs, we must not ask, "How do I get out of this?" but rather, "What can I get out of this?" Job resists the temptation to curse God. He will not give up on his faith and his God. Instead, he rebukes his wife in an effort to pull her out of such foolish thinking. However, as Job's emotions spiral from the physical pain in the coming chapters, he will agree with his wife on one point. Death would be a welcome relief from his agony. Now note that in the Old Testament, Job is considered uniquely Christ-like for the following reasons. Like Christ, Job's suffering was innocent, God himself declared Job blameless. It was for all mankind. It silenced a spiritual battle taking place in heaven. It was complete, emotional, relational, physical, and spiritual suffering all at once, just like Jesus's. And vindicated, God ultimately restored and honored him, just like he did with Jesus. So Job did not cave to the temptation his wife supplied. And with that, Job has now passed 2 tests. He refused to curse God when racked with the emotional pain of losing every blessing he had ever known. And he refused to curse God when racked with the physical pain of losing the only thing he had left, his body. Satan had taken it all. And still, Job did not curse God. Round 2 in this heavenly trial goes to God. The score is now God 2 and the accuser 0. However, Satan never, I repeat, never gives up easily. What is left for the accuser to do? Scene 4, friends or foes from afar.
Verse 11. When Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him, and they began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was.
The news of the great Job's fall has traveled far and wide, and 3 men make a long journey to comfort their friend. The journey alone conveys their care for Job. These friends at this point are a great example to us. They mourn with Job for 7 days. This was really convicting to me when I think of even how I empathize with my children. You know, do I sit with them in it or do I tell them what to do? They sit with him in his discomfort on the ground. Now, this is sometimes the only thing you can do for a suffering loved one. Sit with them in the hospital, often sleeping in a chair, holding their hand, offering sips of water over those ice chips. It's always the ice chips. I don't know why. Sometimes the greatest comfort is not to be alone. Words are not needed to convey compassion. Now, friends can be a comfort, but friends can also confuse, judge, accuse, and frustrate. Job's friends were a comfort when they were silent, but that will change. They will go from comforters to prosecutors, and their judgment of Job is harsh. In the coming chapters, each of these friends represents a different form of attack, no doubt inspired by Satan. Eliphaz plays the role of the pious preacher. Bildad will be the cruel conformist, and Zophar will be the zero mercy zealot. All of them will question Job's integrity, which is something to note about the book of Job. There's a lot of integrity questioning. Everyone questions, accuses, and hence wants some sort of trial. Satan questions God's integrity, essentially accusing him of buying relationships. Job's friends will question Job's integrity, assuming he is hiding his sin. And Job will question God's integrity, accusing God that his reputation as just does not match his actions. All of them want to prove something. Scene 5. Job speaks, and it is heartbreaking and a little bit confusing. This chapter begins the poetic prose of the book of Job. The text is full of lots of words and meanings that are uncertain to us today. It will be interesting to unravel all that meaning, and we will do it.
Job chapter 3. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. He said, "May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said a boy is conceived. That day, may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it, and may no light shine on it. May gloom and utter darkness claim it once more. May a cloud settle over it. May blackness overwhelm it. That night may thick darkness seize it. May it not be included among the days of the year, nor be entered into any of the months. May the night be barren. May no shout of joy be heard in it. May those who curse days curse that day, those who are ready to rouse Leviathan. May its morning stars become dark. May it wait for daylight in vain and not see the first rays of dawn. For it did not shut the doors of the womb on me to hide trouble from my eyes.
So the first thing Job does is he curses the day he was born. Job mentions darkness 3 times, wishing the day of his birth had never dawned. The language used by Job is the opposite of what God described in Genesis 1:3 in the birth or creation of the world. Now, when a baby is born, it comes out of the darkness into the light. Many commentators believe Job is poetically reversing his creation. If God had not created that day, the light of that day, Job would have remained unconceived and in darkness, hidden in the womb. And that is why he mentions the Leviathan. So what is a Leviathan and what does Job want him to do? In ancient East, a Leviathan was a massive sea creature with sharp teeth and armor-like scales. Some scholars think it was a real but extinct creature. Some think Job is referring to ancient mythology, and this was a dragon or sea monster. And some think it was the crocodile. Because I live in Florida and have seen a crocodile over 12 feet, I'm going with the crocodile. In the Nile, they can get up to 20 feet. Now, the Leviathan was associated with danger, chaos, and death. Again, so like a crocodile. All things beyond human control. Some scholars link the Leviathan to Satan. This most likely comes from Revelation 12, which speaks of a great dragon or serpent. So what does Job want the Leviathan to do? Job is just being poetic. He uses the imagery of the Leviathan to symbolize his desire that something would swallow up the day he was born so it would be no more. Well, much to Job's dramatic despair, the day happened. So after cursing the day he was born, Job turns to wishing he had not survived being born.
Verse 11. Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? Why were there knees to receive me and breasts that I might be nursed? For now I would be lying down in peace. I would be asleep and at rest with kings and rulers of the earth who built for themselves places now lying in ruins, with princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not hidden away in the ground like a stillborn child, like an infant who never saw the light of day? There the wicked cease from turmoil, and there the weary are at rest. Captives also enjoy their ease. They no longer hear the slave drivers shout. The small and the great are there, and the slaves are freed from their owners.
Job laments surviving infancy. He could have been born stillborn or not had a mother to nurse him. If he had died, he would be at rest in the ground out of pain. Death holds mercy for Job at this point, and many of us can understand this on some level. Anyone who has walked a loved one through extreme suffering has seen the devastating exhaustion that pain can render. The intense desire for release, rest, and comfort is present in every moment. I have sat with a parent and a friend through long suffering. Despite all the ministrations of hospice, including the escalation of painkillers, there was never complete rest for them until the end. Well, last of all, Job questions the misery of the life he was born into.
Verse 20. Why is light given to those in misery and life to the bitter of soul? To those who long for death that does not come, who search for it more than for hidden treasure, who are filled with gladness and rejoice when they reach the grave. Why is life given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For sighing has become my daily food. My groans pour out like water. What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil.
Job questions the purpose of his existence. It is miserable, bitter. Job wants to die. Ironically, Job feels that God has hedged him in. He is trapped in misery and without hope. But in chapter 1, Satan accused God of the opposite. He said that God had hedged Job in to protect and prosper him.
Job chapter 1, verse 10, Satan replied, "Have you not put a hedge around Job and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land."
Hedging in can be good and bad. So what can we learn from such complete devastation? No matter what our suffering, we must hold fast to what we know to be true about God. God is not cruel. In verse 210, Job said,
"Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?"
From Job's point of view, God acted against him without cause. He is not privy to the trial between God and Satan. And Job's view of his life is our view of life. We are not privy to the same. We cannot begin to understand God's purpose. When we suffer, it is easy to question God's justice, doubt his actions, and blame him. But to do so assumes we know better how to run the world. We don't. Our faith demands that we accept that we will never have all the information to understand the tragedies unfolding in the world until we get to heaven. And God reveals everything we missed. Perhaps even Satan had a court case with us in mind. Well, we are only 3 chapters in. One would think that Job's suffering is over. It was so comprehensive. He suffered in his body, in his heart, and in his mind. And yet there will be more, different, but more in our next episode.
Don't miss what's next. Hit follow or subscribe so the next chapter lands right in your feed. We've got more Bible benders ahead. And if you're enjoying the Bible Book Club, why don't you share it? And then you and all your friends can listen and discuss. New episodes drop every Monday.